one. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the final interview for the month of June. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is an author making their official debut on the show, as well as being the final author interview for the month of June. Now, my guest today is a lover of fiction, fantasy, and philosophy. He writes books influenced by ancient myth and classical stories that aim to explore deeper topics and subjects. His goal is to both entertain and inspire his readers, all while continuing to hone his skill as a storyteller. When he is not writing, he enjoys reading, gaming, and watching shows and movies. In a sense, in his own words, I suppose I'm always engrossed in the realm of fiction in some fashion. So, without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, Mr. Leiland Goldwell. Leiland, welcome to the show.
Hello, one and all. I am Leiland Goldwell, a fantasy fanatic with way too many ideas in my head. Great to be here.
Awesome, Leiland. I'm so excited to have you here. And you pretty much summed it up for all of us authors. We have too many ideas in our heads. I absolutely love it. And again, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk with you about your series as well as your upcoming book. But before we get into that, is there anything else you'd like to share about your background?
Not super much. I tend to be a little shy about putting too much of myself out there. I like, to have people know about me as an author and keep that a little, separate from my personal life. But
That's fair. That is fair. So, if for anyone who has followed Leiland on his socials, he is the author of the incredible series. Some of the works include Prideseeker, Truthseeker, and Sunseeker. So, Leiland, what can you tell us about this series you are working on, as well as your upcoming book in the series?
Well, the Seeker Saga is a series set in a world of gods and monsters called Feral, which is protected by heroes called Seekers. Each book follows a different Seeker protagonist going on their own journeys of self-discovery, so there's no hard set reading order. You can jump in wherever you like.
Ah, okay, all right. Now, what about the most current book that you are working on? What can you tell us about that without giving too many spoilers away?
So Bloodseeker follows a thief named Odd, who was betrayed by his former band of thieves, the Snow Snakes. After 7 years in prison, Odd has been offered a deal. He will get his freedom back in exchange for saving a prince who has been kidnapped by the Snow Snake.
Ooh, all right. I like it. I like it. So, as you said in the beginning, pretty much, well, I assume all exist in like the same universe or the same world. They're like separate stories that the reader can jump into without having to read the previous books to understand, correct?
Exactly, yeah. Every book follows a different protagonist. Some of them are set years apart from one another. They're all in different locations. There might be like little references or Easter eggs or cameos from other characters now and then, but like you don't need to read the other books to understand like the broader main story of what's happening. So
Awesome. Okay. All right. Now, going into your background specifically, as mentioned in your bio, you are a lover of ancient myths and classical stories, and those have influenced your writing, as I'm sure a lot of other factors as well. So, what would you describe or say is like the moment you found that creative drive within you?
well, I've been actually writing all the way back since elementary school, but it wasn't until high school that I started to really think, hey, I've got a lot of ideas in my head and I love, reading, all these ancient stories and myths. I wouldn't mind trying my hand at making a career out of this. it's something that I'm very passionate about, very inspired by. So,
Okay, all right. Now, what would you say was your definitive aha moment? What I mean by that, Leland, is the moment you realized you wanted to take your passion for writing and, as you said, build a career off of it, build your brand as an author.
so I had thoughts in my head about trying to be an author before, but I'd say probably the moment that I actually really started to seriously consider it was during 2020 when we were all kind of stuck inside.
Same.
And I had a lot of free time on my hand, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when I first like really started sitting down and like seriously started, typing out my first book, I just started getting really, really into it, kind of lost myself in it. I thought, yeah, okay, this is absolutely what I want to do.
Awesome. That's incredible. That's amazing. And, as I may have commented before, you and I began around the same time, 2020. Like, that was a period for a lot of authors to really find their craft, or writers rediscovering that passion of theirs to write and create. And that is something that we'll be touching on a little bit later. So now let's jump ahead in time. So walk me through it, Leland. You're at your computer, or maybe you have a notebook and a pen, and you are jotting down the initial outline of the first book in the Seeker saga. When you began this journey of yours, what were the goals you had for yourself as the author, as well as the promise making to your future readers?
Well, I guess my initial goal, first and foremost, was just to kind of figure out what I was doing, as an author, learning just the art of storytelling in general. But over time, like, I came to really understand that, like, a truly great story, I think, needs to, embody a part of the author themselves. So I guess if there's any sort of promise I can make, it's that my books are written with 100% sincerity. Like, I'm not out trying to chase trends or like include genre tropes just for the sake of popularity. I do what I genuinely think will make the best story I can tell.
Awesome. That's really great to hear. And kind of adding more to that, when you began crafting the numerous characters in the Seeker saga, how do you approach creating compelling main characters as well as supporting characters?
Well, I'd say I start each of my books with like a general theme, as it were, like a core central message to the story. And I try to base my characters around that in some way. Um, like, I don't want to get too deep into it because I want readers to be able to discover the themes and messages for themselves.
Of course.
I guess you can definitely tell, like with Bloodseeker, for example, there's like a very obvious and clear theme of like revenge and grudges, and you'll find that all the characters in the story relate to that in some way, for example.
Okay, all right. And then further diving into this topic, I know, as you said in the beginning, all these stories have their own, definitive endings, set of characters, and so forth. So for each of your books, and again, without spoiling too much for Bloodseeker, how do you approach an ending that is satisfying? Or rather, how do you write a satisfying ending for your books?
I'm gonna need to think about this to avoid spoiling anything too deeply.
Of course. We can reference your previous books as you would like.
Sure. Well, like I said, I guess as I mentioned, there's a sort of core theme or message or idea that I want to try to get across with the main character's journey, as well as like all the different characters as well. And I guess
Okay, all right.
What?
Oh, go.
Yeah, so what I try to do is I want every character's journey to conclude in a way that is, again, central to that core theme or idea.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, this is a fun question I like to ask my guests in the beginning. So, Leland, would you consider yourself a panzer or a plotter when it comes to writing your stories?
I'm a little bit of both, if I'm being honest, because I do. So, okay, when I start a new book, my first thing is that I'll create like a sort of outline document that's like, here's the basic synopsis of the plot. Here's like the bios for all the important characters. Here's like some of the major plot beats and locations I want to get to. But of course, the first draft is never going to be the final draft. Things inevitably change. Character rules and motivations might change. I might introduce totally new plot points I hadn't thought about at the beginning. So I have like a rough idea of where I want to go at the start, and then I just kind of wing it from there, I guess.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. And I've heard a lot of authors kind of fall into this category of being both, where they have like a general outline to at least get like from point A to point B, but then they just fill in other aspects depending on how the story is flowing. And sometimes that works for the best. So now I'm very curious. So once you finished writing the first book in the Seeker saga, what was the initial reaction like from friends and family? Did you tell them outright that you were working on this, or did you sort of let them know once the book was finished, this is what?
Yeah, I definitely like my friends and family definitely knew. Are you still there?
Oh, I'm still here.
Okay, good. Internet kind of jerked for a moment. But yeah, like my friends and family definitely knew. I was a little like some of them were a little more involved in the process than others were. But yeah, like once I made my debut with Sunseeker, I naturally try to let everyone, as many people as I could possibly know about it.
Awesome. Well, that's really good. That's really good. Now, in terms of reviews, what have been the overall reviews been for the Seeker Saga in total? Have it been positive reviews, more critical reviews, or a sweet spot down the middle?
I'd say overall reviews have actually been pretty positive. They like I've actually had a couple of professional bloggers and reviewers look at my books, and so far they've had pretty good things to say about them.
That's great. That's really good to hear, because this leads into the next question, which I call the first of a few reflective questions, because I think it is important to touch on these. So, a bit of context for this question, Leland. As I'm sure you and I will definitely agree, being an author is, in a way, a very lonely process because it takes sometimes years to craft the first version of the book, including the rough draft, finding an editor, cover artist, all that stuff. It's very, very lonely and can take a long process. And especially as authors in the digital age, social media is a double-edged sword. On one side, we're able to connect with our readers, our fans, as well as fellow authors and network. But on the other side, unfortunately, we do leave ourselves exposed to a lot of trolls, hate speech, negativity, and just bad everything all around. And that can be very detrimental to an author's overall well-being and mental health. And then, of course, imposter syndrome is always going to be at the forefront. I don't care what anyone says, imposter syndrome is always going to be present. So I'm very curious, Leland, for you and your journey. Have you ever had those moments of heightened anxiety or imposter syndrome? And what has disciplined you to continue writing? And the reason I bring this part up is that it's one thing to write a book, get it out there, and just see what the reaction is like. It's another thing entirely to make the commitment and say, I'm going to make a series out of this because no matter what, this series needs to be shared and told.
Yeah, I will definitely say that like there have definitely been moments where I look at like the success of other authors comparative to myself,
Mhm.
and I think, what am I even doing? Am I doing it good enough? Am I, improving? Is this anything that anyone actually wants to read? And I think I've more or less managed to overcome it by just keeping a general mindset to myself that, like, no book, not even the all-time greats or classics, is ever truly perfect. I shouldn't be striving for perfection. I should be striving to write the best books that I can write.
Yes, that is very true. And that is very, very true, Leland. And that is actually something that we'll be touching on when we get to the business side of being an author. Before we get to that, there is one last question that I did want to ask you in this portion of the interview. And it ties back to in the beginning, as you mentioned before, you began your journey back in 2020. Now, I had a previous guest on the show, Jasmine Young, who commented on her social media that the lockdown years, the COVID years, sort of became a breeding hub for new authors and new creators in general. You had editors, you had content creators, new artists, musicians, and of course, new authors emerge. And this has sparked the debate of whether or not, because of those years in lockdown and isolation, it has created this new golden age or renaissance. And I've been asking this question to a lot of authors and a lot of creatives on the show. Some say that we are in a golden age. Some say that we're in a golden renaissance or a renaissance in general. And others have gone forth and said we are not in either ones because while there is an influx of new material from new authors, a lot of those weren't created with passion behind them. They were just created to exist in the void. So for you, Leland, in your opinion, from your own experiences, do you believe that we are in a renaissance or golden age, or maybe entering that in a few years?
That is a very tricky question to answer because I think there's definitely something there with that mindset. But there is, of course, also the elephant in the room that has to be discussed of like the rise of Gen AI technology, and
Yes.
yeah, people trying to use that to cash in. But I do also genuinely believe that's like there are a lot more creatives out there who are starting to find their voice in this day and age. So I guess I'd say we very could well see a sort of renaissance in the near future, if this, passion and creative spark keeps burning as it has been.
Yes, I 100% agree. And I'm actually glad you brought up the topic, which is, of course, AI. AI has probably been a very important subject that I've talked about on the show with numerous creators, not just authors, but editors and narrators alike.
Yeah.
And I will be the first to admit, and I've said this numerous times on numerous interviews, I have used AI in the sense to help organize my outline as well as help refine my character outlines. I do not use AI to help write my books or rewrite something new. I don't, because it will show. It will
Right.
show the language of AI is going to be very present because there are certain words that are used constantly by the program. So that's this sort of like balance that I've seen a lot of authors use or have discussed on the show. So for you, Leland, in your opinion, if an author were to use AI, should it be in like that regard, like the backbone, the outline, the character synopses, and stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, personally, like, I don't think AI is like evil or anything. It's at the end of the day a tool that can be used for good under the right circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But it should never be used to like replace the creative process or actual creators. Because I will be honest, I have dabbled in AI art as well before I understood that it mostly borrows off of like stolen art to get like a general idea of like environments or like ideas for a potential cover, but I would never use AI in like the final product. And I don't really use it at all anymore. So
Absolutely, absolutely. I've also used a generative AI for concept art whenever I'm working with artists for commissions, or at least to get an idea of what I imagine the character to be. But I would, again, as you said, never use that as the final product. It's just an idea for me to use, as well as I've been working with anyone else in the publishing industry, whether it's cover artists or artists in general, to make commission art that I can sell. I use it as just a template. So it is this balance where you have to treat it as a tool and not use it as the end all or be all. That makes sense.
exactly, yeah. And again, I'm especially a lot iffier on using AI art now because again, like I understand now that like it actively steals from actual creators. So
Definitely, definitely. And on the topic of creators, this now segues perfectly into the business side of being an author. So, as a little icebreaker question, Leland, when you decided to publish the first book in the Seeker saga, how much research did you really look into figure out what publishing road worked best for you? And from the first book to now, what have you learned about the publishing industry?
okay, so publishing Sunseeker was a wild ride because I tried to do a lot of research into a lot of different things. I looked up different publishing companies. I talked with a couple different agents. I looked into self-publishing through Amazon. Um, it took me at least, I want to say, like 3 to 4 months to finally figure all of that out. In the end, though, I've been self-publishing through Amazon and Draft2 Digital for all of my books thus far.
That makes sense. I've heard of Draft to Digital, and a lot of authors have used it, and it is very, very helpful. Now, for those who don't know what Draft to Digital is or books to read, Leland, can you share what that entails based upon your experiences?
Well, I guess in the simplest terms I can put it, Draft2 Digital is a self-publishing company that mostly its biggest benefit is that it helps you get your book out to a lot of different distributors. Like if you put your book up on Draft2 Digital, it will go out to Barnes and Noble, it will go on to Walmart, it will go on to Kobo, it will go on to like a whole bunch of different things. It's very, very handy. The only issue is that Draft2 charges more for Amazon, or rather than Amazon. So you'll have to probably price your book a little higher if you want to go through Draft2 than something directly like Amazon. So
All right. That's important to know. That is very important to know. So now, from your
yeah.
series thus far, this leads to the next question. So, as authors, once we've established a book and established the lore behind it and we publish it, this is where we have to think of, okay, who exactly are we writing towards? And going back to what you said in the beginning, your whole promise and goal as the author of the Seeker Saga is to craft, compelling stories, very good stories, in total and all. So,
Right.
would you consider yourself, Leland, an author who writes for your target audience, or would you consider yourself an author who writes for your readership, i.e., readers like you who enjoy these stories?
I'd say it's a little bit of both, but I guess I'd lean a little bit more towards the latter, right? Because it's like I want, my books to go out to people who I think will like read them and understand the messages that I'm trying to put into them that will, resonate with the characters and the overall themes of each story.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that as authors, especially authors who like write long series of books, it's how best way I can say it. It is a hassle and a grind to really understand your audience and your readership. It is going to be a hit or miss sometimes. It is not easy. And that's what comes with the whole marketing aspect. So,
Right.
up to Bloodseeker, Leland, would you say you have a good idea of who your audience is for your series?
I'd say so, yeah. I guess if I had to describe it, it'd be like, I feel like anyone of any age range, like above 15, can probably like understand and enjoy the story. But yeah, like young adult-ish is definitely like the general, I guess, intended age range.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I definitely kind of understand because again, it's like I read a fair bit of that myself, obviously. So I'd say I have a
Right.
pretty decent grasp on what people generally expect from that.
That's very true. And I'm actually glad you actually brought this notion up of, you've already read books in this category, so you have a good idea. How important is it for authors, in your opinion, to really understand, their genre that they're writing for? Or actually, let me rephrase this. Do you think it is important for authors to read books in the genre that they're writing for to get an idea of what readers expect?
I think that's absolutely important. Yeah. Like, I think, if you're going to write for something, you should at least like understand the appeal of what you're getting into, right? Like, there are a lot of people who kind of just jump on to something because it's popular or because it's a craze
Mm-hmm.
without really understanding it. And that's how you get a lot of schlock, for lack of a better word.
Right.
Yeah. So I definitely think, and again, like I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like, oh, I'm the greatest writer of the genre ever, but like, I feel I have at least a decent grasp of what I'm doing and what people want from the fantasy genre. So
Absolutely, 100%. And I also believe that reading in the genre definitely helps you get an idea of what is allowed in said categories. And what I mean by that, viewers and listeners, is that of the four main categories in the publishing world, you have middle grade, YA, NA, and AF. There are certain things that are allowed and not allowed. So it is very important to understand the genre that you're going into, even though, or say category going into, because let's be honest, there are certain books that are categorized as young adult, but borderline new adult and adult fiction. So it's very important to understand the category, the readership that you're writing for. And this leads to a fun question, Leland. At any point in your writing journey, have any of your books teetered to different readership during the process, or did you make the commitment to make sure that all of your books were for that YA category?
well, I definitely say of the four that I've written so far, Bloodseeker is definitely the one that kind of veers towards like the most mature themes, I suppose.
All right.
So I still consider it YA, but it definitely is the closest I've gotten, I think, to, a more adult book. Not to say that like it'd be inappropriate for young readers, just again, goes a little darker than the others, I suppose.
Absolutely. That makes sense. That makes sense. And this leads into another discussion, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, Leland, which is this balancing act of an author's individuality and understanding the genre and the readership. Because as you've said in the beginning, you are trying to write your own stories. You're not trying to follow any trends or any clicks or tropes that are popular in the publishing industry. But unfortunately, that is sometimes a huge detriment to the publishing industry. And a lot of readers sometimes expect all those to exist in said books. And even not having tropes or clicks, readers do have an expectation of a certain style of storytelling, whether it's fantasy, sci-fi, noir. There is that expectation to meet, and we don't want to make our stories too original where it's completely going to throw the reader out of whack with the story, but we also don't want to be a cookie cut copy of someone else's story, even though, as the saying goes, every story has been told. So for
Right.
you, Leland, and your journey, how have you balanced the two, your individuality and understanding the genre that?
Well, so I mentioned before how it's like every one of my stories has like a core theme as like the basis. But another aspect of each of my books is, as I mentioned before, they revolve around a certain. So, like, take Sunseeker, for example.
Right.
Sunseeker, the basic premise of it is inspired by a lot of like ancient myths where like the sun goes missing from the sky. Like in Japanese myth, you've got Amaterasu being hidden away in a cave. In Norse myth, you've got the sun and the moon being devoured by Skull and Hati. So I guess it's like I take that general idea of like just certain themes or ideas that are very common in like old stories and myths, and I use that as kind of like a basis, but my goal was to add like a unique or interesting twist on that.
All right, all right. Fascinating, fascinating. And leading down into this business side, of course, as authors, it is very important to also, connect with our readers and connect with other authors, which leads to the discussion of networking, which is imperative for all authors to really, really understand, because networking is your best friend. It is going to open a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities for you. So, Leland, this is another two-part question. In your opinion, how important is it for authors to really begin or grow their networking circle? And are there any other authors or any special people you like to give a shout out to who have helped you on your journey?
I definitely say, yeah, like getting to know other authors personally can be really beneficial, not just because of the opportunities it creates, but also because like they can be good for bouncing ideas off of each other, asking for advice, um, just general stuff like that. I've met a couple of other authors at conventions who have been extremely useful in that sort of thing. In particular, I want to give a shout out to one Ian Laurier, who writes a mix of young adult and more adult things, but they have been extraordinarily helpful in helping me find opportunities to get myself out there and, try to make more of a name for myself. So,
Awesome. Well, that's really good. That is really, really good to hear. And also, on this topic of networking, who designed your covers, if I may ask?
so all of my covers are actually designed by various different artist friends that I
Okay.
know personally. Um, Books 1 and 3, Sunseeker and Prideseeker, were done by the same artist, Nithy Bunny. Book 2 was done by Baroness Art, and book 4 was done by a user simply known as Fawn. I can maybe give you links to all of their profiles after this if you want. so you can throw those up and.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Nice. That's really good. That's amazing. So really good to hear that you have like a good group of people who are not only very supportive of your work, but also, join you to grow your brand as an author, which leads to a very important discussion, which also leads into a very powerful question. So brace yourself, Leland. This is a very, very loaded question. So
I am bracing.
I've been doing this show now for about 6-7 years, and I just had to look back at my analytics. I've been on YouTube thus far for about, I want to say, 3 years. And within 3 years, I have had 360 videos, a third of which are authors, which is insane. And for anyone who's known me on Anchor, I've interviewed probably maybe good 50 to 100 people over 4 years, including other interviews. It is absolutely insane. And I've learned a lot from these people. And the most powerful piece of advice that I have gotten that I always like to share is that in this industry, it's not a get rich quick scheme. Being an author is not a moneymaker. Will we all like that to be the case? Absolutely. If that were the case, myself, Leland, and a bunch of other people will be quitting our day jobs and just writing nonstop as our careers. But that is not the case. And it comes down to this mindset of writing as a hobby and writing as a business. And if you go down the business side, if you commit to that, that leads to another debate of what kind of author do you want to be? Do you want to be an author, or do you want to be known as an author? Because those are two very different goals. One is dedicated to the craft, the other is dedicated to the business. And they lead to the same outcome. But as I talked to a lot of authors on this show, the second path is most enticing to a lot of new and aspiring writers, which have unrealistic goals. And as I said, in this industry, it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's not a money maker. And there is no guarantee at the end of the day your book is going to be a financial success. Are there exceptions to that rule? Absolutely. But those are the exceptions. Generally, an author is not going to sell 100 copies, let alone 500 copies or 1,000 copies. It's not possible. So you have to understand your goals realistically. So, Leland, imagine this little scenario. Let's say, as mentioned before, you have a YouTube channel. So let's say you are creating a YouTube channel, a video essay explaining this topic. How would you tell your viewers, fellow authors, fellow readers, and probably fellow writers that if they pursue this path, there is no guarantee that they're going to be a financial success, or their book may not sell a lot of copies, but it shouldn't be seen as a negative aspect of themselves as a writer or creator. Instead, have it be viewed as a teaching moment, because as authors, we only get better as time goes on.
Well, I think you actually summed it up quite nicely yourself, but if I had to put in my own words, I suppose I'd say, yeah, like getting rich or famous should not be the goal, not just from a moral standpoint, but also from a realism standpoint as well. I definitely say that, like, again, like you said, it would be very, very nice to get to a point where it's like you can make, a decent enough living off of just being an author, especially in this economy. But
yes,
really, you should be an author more than anything else, just for the love of the craft, right? Like, again, that's not even like a sentimental or morality thing. Like, if you're doing this just because you expect to get rich or famous, there's probably other get rich quick schemes out there that would be better for that, if I'm being honest.
that is very true. That is very, very true, Leland. And as we near the end of this incredible author interview, here is the final question. Everything you've learned thus far, highs and lows, struggles and all, what is your word of wisdom to fellow authors and writers watching this interview right now?
I'd have to say the single biggest piece of advice I can give is your first draft should never be your final draft. Like, it's very important to, be critical of yourself, to analyze what works and what doesn't in your own story. But you should also never let that negativity take hold of you. And you should be able to learn when to say, this may not be perfect, but it is good enough, right? Like, basically find a middle ground, I suppose. Like, don't, again, go out there thinking that you're writing like the next great classic or whatever, but have enough self-esteem to at least acknowledge, like, maybe after 3 or 4 drafts, you're thinking, okay, maybe what I've got here is enough. And of course, like, other people's advice and input can be very useful as well. Just don't strive for perfection, but don't get bogged down in negativity, I guess, is to sum it up.
And that is perfectly said, Leiland. And a perfect ending to our final author interview for the month of June. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this incredible episode. I want to give a huge thank you to our guest, Leiland Goldwell, for making his official debut on the show. Leiland, where can people find you on social media if they wanted to reach out and connect, as well as buy copies of your Seeker Saga up to Bloodseeker? And when is Bloodseeker coming out?
Bloodseeker is actually coming out at the end of this month on June 30th.
Awesome.
I felt it was appropriate to release in Pride Month because its protagonist is queer. But as for where you can find me, I'm mostly active on Blue Sky, and sometimes I post on Tumblr. I also do have a Ko-fi if anyone wants to donate to that. And as for where to find my books, again, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and several other places as well. Again, thanks to Draft 2 Digital. It's cheapest on Amazon, but if you want to find it other places, you definitely can. Just, search for one of my books and Leiland Goldwell, and you can probably find it.
Awesome. And you also have a YouTube channel, correct? Where can people find, or what is the name of your channel so people can subscribe to it?
My YouTube channel is Goldlight. I mostly do video essay, and sometimes I delve into rewrite content as well.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video, viewers and listeners. Thank you again for joining us for the month of June. And I cannot wait to share with you all what I have in store for July. July is looking to be probably my most filled month for interviews. So I'm very excited to share with you all that newsletter when it comes out. So make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date. Again, a huge thank you to Leiland for coming on the show and making his official debut. And hopefully this will not be the last time we have Leiland on the show. So make sure to subscribe to his channel and follow him on all socials, as well as buy copies of the Seeker Saga, as well as pre-order Bloodseeker before it comes out. And as always, viewers and listeners, thank you so much for your love and support. This is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you all next month.